The bread was stale. Thomas Sullivan knew at the moment his fingers pressed against the paper bag the church volunteer handed him. 3 days past edible, maybe 4. But when you hadn't eaten in 36 hours, stale was a feast. He didn't open it there on the church steps. Never did. The other men waiting in line had eyes like vultures, and weakness attracted predators even in places meant for mercy. Thomas tucked the bag under his torn jacket and walked the 6 blocks to his spot, the loading dock behind the old Riverside Theater where the evening wind didn't cut quite as deep. Hey there, friend. Yeah, you. Wherever you're watching from tonight, Chicago, Mumbai, Sao Paulo, I'm glad you're here. I'm really glad. Before we dive into Thomas's story, do me a favor. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit that button right now. Trust me, you're going to want to follow what happens next. This story, it's going to change how you see everything. The November sky was bleeding purple into black. Thomas's hands shook as he settled onto the concrete, not from the cold but from hunger. The kind that hollowed you out, made your vision swim, turned your stomach into a clenched fist. He opened the bag. The dinner roll looked like it had been beautiful once. Now it was hard enough to break teeth. Thomas didn't care. He bit down, jaw working against the resistance, and that's when he felt it, something that didn't crunch like stale bread should. Paper. His molars had caught on something smooth. Papery. Wrong. Thomas pulled the roll from his mouth, turned it over. There, embedded in the bottom like a tumor, was a corner of something green. His pulse kicked. No, it couldn't be. He tore the roll apart with shaking fingers. Bills. 20s. 50s. They cascaded into his lap like leaves, like answered prayers, like a hallucination his starving brain had conjured from desperation. Oh God, Thomas whispered. Oh God, oh God, oh. He counted with trembling hands. Once. Twice. 3 times because his brain refused to believe. 7,000 for $100. 7,000. $400. Hidden inside a dinner roll given to a homeless man at a church soup kitchen. The loading dock spun. Thomas's vision tunneled. This wasn't real. This was a test. A trap. A cruel joke the universe was playing on a man who'd already lost everything. His job, his apartment, his wife, his dignity, his will to fight. But the money was real. He could smell it, that particular scent of worn currency that had passed through 1,000 hands. Could feel the weight of it, the promise of it. Rent. Food. A shower. Clean clothes. A bus ticket to Atlanta where his sister lived, where he could start over, where he could be Thomas Sullivan the accountant again instead of Thomas Sullivan the bum who slept behind dumpsters. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket on instinct, ready to hide the cash, ready to run before anyone saw, before anyone took this miracle away from him. Then he saw the note. It had been wrapped around the innermost bills, and in his frenzy, he'd almost missed it. Small. Folded tight. The paper was good quality, expensive. The handwriting was shaky, elderly maybe, or written in a hurry. Thomas unfolded it with fingers that had forgotten how to be gentle. Please. This is everything I have left. I'm desperate. If you find this, you'll know what to do. The girl with the red hair needs this by midnight, or they'll kill her. I can't go to the police. Please. You're my last hope. Mr. The words punched through Thomas's hunger, through his desperation, through the fog of survival that had become his entire world. A girl. Red hair. Midnight. They'll kill her. His eyes snapped to his wristwatch. The one thing he'd refused to pawn because his father had given it to him, because it was the last piece of his old life he could hold on to. 8:47 p.m. 2 hours and 13 minutes. No, Thomas said to the empty loading dock. No. This wasn't his problem. He didn't know any girl with red hair. Didn't know who Mr. was. This money, this miracle, it was his now. Finders keepers. The universe owed him this much after taking everything else. His stomach cramped, fierce and demanding. When was the last time he'd eaten a real meal? Not scraps, not stale bread, but actual food that didn't come from a dumpster or a church handout. 3 weeks. Maybe 4. The money could change that. Tonight. Right now. Thomas shoved the bills back into the bag, his movements jerky, panicked. He'd hide it. Sleep on it. In the morning he'd. The girl with the red hair needs this by midnight or they'll kill her. Not my problem, he said aloud, voice cracking. But his hands had stopped moving. The bag sat in his lap, heavy as a tombstone. What kind of trouble put a girl's life on a timer? Kidnapping? Ransom? Debt to the kind of people who made good on their threats? And who was MR? Why hide money in a dinner roll? Why not go to the police? I can't go to the police. That sentence lodged in Thomas's chest like a blade. He thought of his own daughter. Emma, 10 years old, with her mother now, hadn't seen her father in 8 months. Didn't know he was living on the streets. Sarah had made sure of that, had told Emma that Daddy was working far away, which was kinder than the truth. If Emma was in danger, if some stranger found a note with her life hanging in the balance, what would Thomas pray for? He'd pray for someone better than who he'd become. Someone who hadn't given up. Someone who'd do the right thing even when it cost everything. Thomas looked at the money again. Looked at the note. Looked at his watch. 8:51 p.m. 2 hours and 9 minutes. He didn't know where to start. Didn't know who the girl was, who MR was, how to find them. How to deliver money he'd found by pure chance in a piece of bread from a church that probably served hundreds of people every week. The smart move was to keep it. The survival move was to run. The sane move was to convince himself this wasn't real, that the note was a prank, that he'd imagined the desperation in those shaky words. But Thomas Sullivan had been an accountant once, had been a father, had been a man who believed in things like honor and responsibility and doing right even when it hurt. Maybe he still was. God help me, Thomas whispered, and shoved the money into his jacket's inner pocket, the one with the zipper that still worked. Then he stood up, legs weak but steady enough, and started walking back toward the church. He had 2 hours to save a stranger's life, and absolutely no idea how. The church was locked. Thomas rattled the heavy oak doors, then pounded with his fist, the sound echoing through the empty street. Nothing. The lights were off. The soup kitchen had closed an hour ago, volunteers gone home to their warm houses and full refrigerators. Come on, Thomas muttered, pressing his forehead against the cold wood. Think. Think like you used to think, before the streets scrambled your brain. He circled the building, trying to remember. There'd been a woman tonight at the serving station. Young, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and a volunteer badge that said Grace. She'd been the one to hand him the bread bag. Had she known what was inside? Was she MR? No, the handwriting had looked older, shakier. But Grace might know who MR was. Might know about a girl with red hair. Thomas checked his watch. 9:03 p.m. 1 hour and 57 minutes. The volunteer parking lot was empty except for one car. A silver Honda with a faded coexist bumper sticker. Someone was still here. He moved to the side entrance, the one the volunteers used, and found it propped open with a rubber doorstop. Thank God for fire code violations. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over an industrial kitchen. The smell hit him first: soup, bread, bleach, the ghost of hundreds of meals. His stomach twisted with want. Hello, Thomas called out. His voice sounded wrong here, too rough, too desperate. Is anyone? We're closed. The woman emerged from the storage room, arms full of collapsed cardboard boxes. Grace. Up close, Thomas could see the exhaustion in her face, the shadows under her eyes. She froze when she saw him. Sir, you can't be in here. I know. I'm sorry. Thomas pulled the bag from his jacket, then hesitated. What if she called the police? What if she thought he'd stolen it? I need to ask you about something. About the bread you gave me. Grace's expression shifted from wary to confused. The bread? Was there something wrong with it? No. Yes. There was. He couldn't say it here, out in the open. What if someone else heard? What if they tried to take the money? Can we talk somewhere private? Absolutely not. Grace set down the boxes, and Thomas saw her hand move subtly toward her phone. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Please. The word came out broken. There's a girl in danger. Someone put money in the bread. A lot of money. And a note. It said. What? Grace's hand stopped. What did you say? Thomas pulled out the note, unfolded it with shaking hands, held it out to her. Do you know who MR is? Do you know anything about a girl with red hair? Grace took the note, her face going pale as she read. Her lips moved silently, forming the words. When she looked up, her eyes were wide with something between fear and recognition. Oh no, she whispered. Oh no, no, no. Margaret. Who's Margaret? Margaret Riley. She volunteers here on Tuesdays. Grace's voice was rising, panic threading through. She's 83 years old. Lives alone. Her granddaughter. She stopped, hand flying to her mouth. Sophia. Red hair. Oh God, Sophia. The pieces were sliding together, ugly and sharp. What happened? Thomas asked. Grace was already moving, grabbing her coat from a hook, her phone from her pocket. Her fingers fumbled over the screen. Margaret came in this morning. She was distraught, crying. Said her granddaughter was in terrible trouble. I thought she meant drugs or… I didn't realize. She dialed, pressed the phone to her ear. Come on, Margaret, pick up. Pick up. Thomas watched her, saw the color drain from her face as the call went to voicemail. She's not answering. Grace tried again. Same result. Then she was typing frantically, texting. Margaret lives 3 blocks from here. We need to. She looked at Thomas, really looked at him for the first time. Saw the torn jacket, the dirt under his fingernails, the desperation that clung to him like a scent. Did you keep any of it? The money? No. The lie would have been easier. Would have been safer. It's all here. Every dollar. Something shifted in Grace's expression. Softened. What's your name? Thomas Sullivan. Thomas, I need you to come with me. We need to get this money to Margaret, and then… She was already heading for the door. Do you know what time it is? 9:07. We have less than 2 hours. Grace's hands were shaking as she unlocked her car. Get in. Thomas hesitated. He didn't know this woman. Didn't know if he could trust her, if this was real, if he was walking into something dangerous. But a girl named Sophia with red hair had less than 2 hours to live, and he was holding the ransom in his jacket pocket. He got in. Grace drove like someone who'd forgotten how. Fast, then too slow, her breathing uneven. Margaret's granddaughter moved here 6 months ago, she said, words tumbling out. From Miami. She was running from her ex-boyfriend. Margaret said he was dangerous. Abusive. Sophia had a restraining order, but he kept finding her. Thomas's chest tightened. He knew this story. Had seen it on the news a dozen times. Had read about it in the paper back when he had an apartment with a subscription. You think he took her? I don't know what to think. Grace ran a red light, didn't seem to notice. Margaret said Sophia disappeared 3 days ago. She thought maybe Sophia had just run again, gotten scared, but then… Her voice broke. Someone must have contacted Margaret. Demanded money. That's why she hid it in the bread. Why not go to the police? He threatened to kill Sophia if Margaret involved them. That's how these men work. That's how they keep control. Grace's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Margaret doesn't have that kind of money. She's on Social Security. She must have scraped together everything, her savings, maybe sold things. And she couldn't deliver it herself because she can't walk more than a block without her oxygen tank. And she probably didn't know who to trust, so she gave it to God, Thomas finished quietly. She put it in the church donations, hoped someone honest would find it. Grace glanced at him, and Thomas saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen directed at him in months. Respect. She chose well, Grace said softly. Thomas looked down at his hands. Honest. The word felt foreign. He'd spent the last 8 months lying, to himself, to the other men on the streets, to the daughter who thought he was working far away. He'd told himself he was just unlucky, just down on his luck, that he'd get back on his feet any day now. But the truth was simpler and uglier. He'd given up. After the accounting firm downsized and his marriage imploded and the eviction notice came, he'd just stopped fighting. Stopped believing he deserved better. Stopped being the man his father had raised him to be. Until tonight. Until $7,400 in a dinner roll had asked him a question he couldn't ignore. Who are you really? There. Grace jerked the car to the curb in front of a small bungalow with a porch light on. That's Margaret's house. They were out of the car and up the walkway before Thomas could second guess. Grace pounded on the door. Margaret. It's Grace from the church. Margaret, please open up. Silence. Then a shuffle of footsteps, slow and deliberate. The porch light flickered. The woman who opened the door was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, with white hair and eyes that had seen too much. She wore a house dress and had an oxygen cannula in her nose, the tube trailing back to a machine humming somewhere inside. Grace. Margaret's voice was papery, confused. Then she saw Thomas, saw the bag in his hands, and her face crumpled. You found it. Oh, merciful God, you found it. She reached for the bag, but her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't grip it. Thomas held it steady, let her feel the weight of it, let her know it was real. It's all here, ma'am, he said. Every dollar. Margaret looked up at him, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, and Thomas saw his own mother in her face. Saw his sister. Saw every woman who'd ever loved someone more than her own life. Bless you, she whispered. Bless you, young man. You don't know, you can't know what you've. Margaret. Grace's voice was gentle but urgent. We need to know what's happening. Where's Sophia? Who took her? The old woman's face hardened. That devil she was fool enough to date. Derek Kane. He found her. I don't know how, but he found her. Called me 2 nights ago, said if I ever wanted to see Sophie alive again, I'd get him $7,500 by midnight tonight. Thomas's blood went cold. You're short. I know. Margaret's voice broke. I sold my wedding ring. My mother's china. Everything I could. But I could only get $7,400. I prayed maybe he'd. She couldn't finish. Grace had her phone out. We're calling the police. Right now. No. Margaret grabbed Grace's arm with surprising strength. He said no police. He said he'd know. He said he'd kill her. He's going to kill her anyway, Thomas heard himself say. Both women turned to look at him. Men like that, they don't let go. Even if you pay, he'll come back. Next month, next year. He'll bleed you until there's nothing left, and then he'll kill her anyway because she tried to leave him. The words came from some deep place Thomas hadn't known he still had. Some part of him that still remembered being a man who protected people, who stood between the helpless and the wolves. Then what do we do? Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. Thomas looked at his watch. 9:24 p.m. 1 hour and 36 minutes. We deliver the money, he said. But we do it smart. Where's the drop-off? Margaret's hands trembled as she unfolded a crumpled piece of paper. The old Riverside Theater. Loading dock. Midnight. Come alone. Thomas's stomach dropped. That's where I was. That's where I opened the bread. The 3 of them stared at each other, the coincidence too strange to be random. Of all the places in the city, of all the spots a homeless man could choose to eat his dinner, he'd picked the exact location where a monster was holding a girl hostage. God's hand, Margaret whispered. That's God's hand at work. Thomas wasn't sure about God anymore, but he was sure about geography. I know that building. Every entrance, every exit. I've been sleeping there for 3 months. Grace's eyes locked on his, sharp with sudden understanding. You can get inside. The east window. Broken latch. I can get in quiet. Thomas's mind was already mapping it out, years of accounting precision shifting to something more immediate. But we're still short $100. I have 60 in my purse, Grace said, already digging through her bag. I can get 40. Margaret started toward the back of her house, moving as fast as her oxygen tank would allow. There's a jar in the kitchen. Wait. Thomas stopped them both. His hand moved to his pocket, to the 220s he'd been saving for a week. Emergency money. Bus fare money. The money that was supposed to get him to Atlanta, to his sister, to a fresh start. He pulled out the bills, added them to Grace's 60. Margaret returned with a handful of crumpled 1s and 5s, counted out exactly $40. Together, they stacked it with the rest. $7,500. Exactly. We can't just hand it over, Grace said. What if he takes the money in? He will. Thomas was certain. Men like Derek don't keep promises. But if we're smart, if we get the police involved the right way. No police. Margaret's voice cracked. He'll kill her. He won't know. Thomas met Margaret's eyes, held them steady. I deliver the money. I can get in without being seen, scout the location. Grace, you stay with Margaret and call the police from here. Tell them what's happening, but tell them to wait. No sirens, no lights. They set up a perimeter. Wait for my signal. What signal? Grace asked. I'll figure that out when I see the setup. But I won't hand over the money until I know Sophia's alive and I know the police are in position. Thomas checked his watch. 9:47 p.m. 1 hour and 13 minutes. The theater is 15 minutes from here on foot. Take my car, Grace said immediately. No. Cars are noticeable. People remember cars. I need to approach on foot, stay invisible. Thomas looked down at himself. The torn jacket, the dirty jeans, the face nobody looked at twice. For the first time in months, being invisible was an advantage. Nobody sees homeless people. I can get close. Grace studied him for a long moment. Her hand reached out, touched his arm, warm even through the jacket. You're not homeless. You're just someone who lost their way for a while. The words hit Thomas harder than they should have. He looked at this woman, this stranger who'd decided to see him as human, who trusted him with a life, who believed he was capable of something more than begging for change. I need a phone, he said, voice rough. Grace handed him hers without hesitation. My numbers. I know. It'll be in the recent calls. Thomas pocketed it, then looked at Margaret. I'm bringing your granddaughter home. I promise you that. The old woman grabbed his hand with both of hers, squeezed with desperate strength. I'll be praying every second. Thomas nodded, turned toward the door, then stopped. What does Sophia look like? Besides the red hair. 26. 5'6". Green eyes. There's a scar on her left eyebrow from when she fell off her bike as a child. Margaret's voice caught. She's thin. Too thin. Derek never let her eat enough. Said she needed to stay pretty for him. Rage, clean and sharp, cut through Thomas's fear. He knew men like Derek. Had worked with them, golfed with them, seen them smile at their secretaries while their eyes promised violence. Had seen one hit his wife in a parking lot once and done nothing, said nothing, because it wasn't his business. He'd been a coward then. Not tonight. I've got this, Thomas said, and walked out into the November night. The walk to Riverside Theater took 12 minutes. Thomas moved through shadows, avoiding the main streets, sticking to alleys he knew by heart. The city looked different when you had a purpose. Less like a prison, more like a chessboard. He approached from the north, the direction no one would expect. The theater loomed against the sky, 6 stories of abandoned Art Deco architecture. It had been beautiful once, before the money dried up and the city forgot about culture. Thomas circled wide, checking angles. No cars in the lot. No obvious lookouts. But Derek wouldn't be stupid. He'd be inside, somewhere he could control the space. The east window was right where Thomas had left it, ground level, half hidden behind a dumpster. He slid it open, muscles remembering the motion, and dropped inside. The darkness swallowed him whole. Thomas froze, letting his eyes adjust. He was in the old prop storage room, familiar territory. Slowly, carefully, he moved toward the door. Voices. Faint, echoing from somewhere deeper in the building. Thomas eased the door open, slipped into the hallway. The voices grew clearer. Male. Angry. Coming from the main stage area. He crept forward, placing each foot with infinite care. The hallway opened into the orchestra seating, rows of torn velvet chairs facing a stage where the curtains still hung in tatters. Light spilled from backstage. Thomas dropped low, moving between seat rows, getting closer. Told you I don't have it. The voice was female, ragged with fear. Sophia. Your grandmother has until midnight. Derek's voice was smooth, almost gentle. That's what made it terrifying. If she loves you, she'll find a way. Thomas risked a glance over the seat backs. The stage was lit by a single work light. Sophia sat in a chair, hands zip-tied behind her back. Red hair, matted and dirty. Green eyes, wide with terror. The scar on her left eyebrow. Derek paced in front of her, phone in hand. Mid-30s, gym-built, with the kind of face that photographed well. He wore expensive jeans and a leather jacket. Normal. That's what made monsters dangerous. They looked normal. She's 83, Sophia said, voice breaking. She doesn't have that kind of money. Then you should have thought about that before you ran. Derek's hand shot out, grabbed her chin, forced her to look at him. You belong to me. You don't get to leave. Thomas's hand tightened on the money bag. He had to call Grace, get the police moving. But if he made noise now, if Derek heard. His phone, Grace's phone, was in his pocket. He pulled it out, hands shaking, and tried to remember Grace's number from when Margaret had called it. The screen lit up, bright as a flare in the darkness. Derek's head snapped toward the orchestra section. Who's there? Thomas froze. I said who's there? Derek moved toward the stage edge, peering into the shadows. No choice. Thomas stood up, phone behind his back, hitting what he hoped was the call button. Delivery, Thomas said, keeping his voice steady. I've got your money. Derek's face split into a grin. Well, the old bitch sent a homeless guy to do her dirty work. He laughed, the sound echoing through the empty theater. Come on up. Let's see if she got it right. Thomas climbed onto the stage, every instinct screaming at him to run. Behind his back, he heard Grace's voice, tiny and distant. Thomas? Thomas, what's? He cleared his throat, spoke loud enough for the phone to catch. Riverside Theater, main stage. 1 hostage, 1 suspect. I'm delivering $7,500 ransom for Sophia Riley, held by Derek Kane. Derek's grin vanished. What the hell are you? The money's real. It's all here. Thomas pulled the bag from his jacket, held it up. But I need to see her walk before I hand it over. Derek pulled a gun from his waistband. Small, silver, deadly. You're not in a position to negotiate, old man. Thomas's blood turned to ice. But he didn't lower the bag. Behind his back, he hoped, prayed. that Grace was hearing this, that she was calling the police, that help was coming. He just had to buy time. "Shoot me," Thomas said quietly, "and you'll never find the money. I'll fall, the bag will scatter. By the time you collect it all, the police will be here. That phone call I just made, they're already on their way." It was a bluff. Probably. Thomas had no idea if Grace had heard, if she'd understood, if she was doing anything at all. But Derek didn't know that. The gun wavered. Derek's eyes darted to the bag, to Sophia, back to Thomas. "You're bluffing." "Maybe," Thomas said. "You willing to bet your freedom on it?" The theater fell silent except for Sophia's breathing, harsh and rapid. Derek's finger tightened on the trigger. "Put the gun down," Thomas said, forcing his voice to stay calm. "You're a smart guy, Derek. You know how this ends if you pull that trigger. I know how it ends if I don't get my money." Derek's hand was steady, but sweat beaded on his forehead. "Toss the bag. Now. Cut her loose first." Not happening. They were at an impasse. Thomas could see it in Derek's eyes, the calculation, the rage, the desperation of a man whose control was slipping. These were the most dangerous moments. When men like Derek felt cornered, they burned everything down. Sophia's voice cut through the tension. "Thomas? Your name is Thomas?" He glanced at her. She was staring at him with those green eyes, and he saw something flicker there, recognition maybe, or hope. "How do you know my—" "Margaret talks about you," Sophia said quickly. "At the church. She said there's a man who never takes more than one serving, who always says thank you. She said you have kind eyes." Derek laughed, harsh and ugly. "Kind eyes? He's a bum. A nobody." "He came," Sophia said, voice stronger now. "That's more than you ever did. Come when it mattered." The gun swung toward her. "Shut up. Don't." Thomas took a step forward, and the gun snapped back to him. "Stay back." Derek's composure was cracking. Everyone needs to shut up and let me think." That's when Thomas heard it. Faint but growing closer. Sirens. Derek heard them too. His face went white, then red with rage. "You called them. You actually—" He grabbed Sophia by the hair, yanked her head back, pressed the gun to her temple. "I'll kill her. I swear to God I'll—" "Derek Kane. This is the police. The building is surrounded." The voice boomed from outside, amplified through a megaphone. Thomas's legs nearly buckled with relief. Grace had heard. Grace had called them. Grace had saved them all. Derek's breathing came fast and shallow now. Panic. Thomas knew that look. Had seen it in the mirror plenty of times. The moment when a man realized he'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "You're done," Thomas said quietly. "It's over. But you can still walk out of this alive. Let her go." "Alive? I'm going to prison." Derek's voice cracked. "Do you know what they do to guys like me in there? Do you know what happens to men who—" He couldn't finish. "Better than what happens to men who murder hostages on camera." Thomas nodded toward the corners of the theater. "This place has security cameras. Old ones, but they work. Everything you've done tonight, it's recorded." It was another bluff. The cameras had been dead for years. But Derek didn't know that. His eyes darted upward, searching the shadows. "You're lying." "Am I?" Thomas took a small step forward. "Even if I am, the police know you're here. They know you kidnapped Sophia. They know you demanded ransom. But right now? Right now they don't know if you're a kidnapper or a murderer. That's still your choice." Outside, more voices. Commands. The sound of tactical units moving into position. "Derek Kane, release the hostage and exit with your hands up. This is your final warning." Sophia was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Her eyes met Thomas's, and he saw his daughter in them. Saw Emma, saw every person who'd ever been hurt by someone who claimed to love them. "Listen to me," Thomas said, and his voice was the voice of a father, of the man he'd been before the world broke him. "I know you're scared. I know you think you've got no way out. But you do. You let her go, you walk out of here, you take responsibility for what you've done. That's how you save yourself. Not this. Never this. You don't know anything about me." But Derek's hand was shaking now, the gun wavering. "I know you're hurting. I know something in you is broken. I know you think if you can't have her, nobody can." Thomas took another step. He was close enough to touch them now. Close enough to die. "But that's not love, Derek. That's not what love does. What do you know about love?" Derek spat. "You're homeless. You're nothing. You probably don't have anyone who gives a damn if you live or die." The words hit home, sharp and accurate. Thomas had thought the same thing 1,000 times. Had believed it, let it hollow him out. But Grace's words echoed back. You're not homeless. You're just someone who lost their way for a while. I have a daughter, Thomas said. Her name is Emma. She's 10 years old. And right now, she thinks I'm working far away because her mother was kind enough to lie about what really happened to me. About how I gave up. About how I stopped fighting. His voice cracked. But tonight I'm fighting. For Sophia. For Margaret. For every person who ever needed someone to stand up when it mattered. So don't you dare tell me I'm nothing. Something shifted in Derek's face. The gun lowered an inch. Just an inch, but it was enough. Thomas moved. Fast, faster than he'd moved in months. He grabbed Derek's wrist, twisted it upward. The gun fired, the shot deafening in the enclosed space. Plaster rained from the ceiling. They went down hard, grappling. Derek was younger, stronger, better fed. But Thomas had something Derek didn't. He'd already lost everything. He had nothing left to fear. Thomas got his hand on the gun, wrenched it away. It skittered across the stage floor. Derek's fist connected with his ribs, once, twice. Pain exploded white-hot. Then the doors burst open. Police flooded in, tactical gear, weapons drawn. Freeze. Hands where we can see them. Derek scrambled away from Thomas, hands up. I didn't, he attacked me. I was just. Save it. An officer had Derek on his stomach, cuffing him in seconds. Another cut Sophia's zip ties. She collapsed forward, and a female officer caught her, murmured something soft and reassuring. Thomas lay on the stage floor, ribs screaming, lungs burning. He'd done it. Sophia was safe. Derek was in custody. It was over. Hands helped him sit up. A paramedic, checking him for injuries. Sir, can you tell me your name? Thomas. Thomas Sullivan. Thomas. Grace's voice cut through the chaos. She was pushing through the police line, Margaret behind her, moving as fast as the oxygen tank would allow. Grace dropped to her knees beside him, hands on his face, checking him for damage. Are you insane? You could have been killed. Probably, Thomas admitted. But she's alive. Grace's eyes were wet. You saved her. You actually. She couldn't finish. She just pulled him into a hug, fierce and desperate. Over her shoulder, Thomas saw Sophia embracing Margaret, both of them crying. Saw Derek being hauled away in handcuffs, still shouting about his rights. Saw the police collecting the money from where it had fallen. Excuse me. A detective approached, notepad out. I need to get your statement, Mr. Sullivan. You're the one who made the drop. Yes, sir. And you found the ransom money in a dinner roll at a church? Thomas almost laughed at how absurd it sounded. Yes, sir. The detective studied him. You could have kept it. Run. No one would have known. I would have known. Grace squeezed his hand. Her touch was warm, real, the first human connection Thomas had felt in longer than he could remember. The detective nodded slowly. The city could use more people like you, Mr. Sullivan. He pulled out a business card, handed it to Thomas. When you're ready to give that full statement, call this number. And Thomas? Thank you for your service tonight. Service. As if Thomas was still somebody. As if he mattered. Maybe he did. Margaret and Sophia approached, the old woman leaning heavily on her granddaughter. Sophia's face was bruised, her hair a mess, but she was smiling through tears. Thank you, she said simply. I don't know how to. There aren't words for. You don't have to, Thomas said. I'm just glad you're safe. Margaret pressed something into his hand. This is for you. Thomas looked down. It was a key. What? My garage apartment. It's small, but it's warm and dry. There's a bed, a bathroom, a little kitchen. You need a place to stay. Margaret's voice was firm, brooking no argument. And before you say no, I need someone to help with yard work, with fixing things around the house. I can't pay much, but I can offer room and board. Margaret, I can't. You can. You will. She patted his cheek with a wrinkled hand. God put that money in your hands for a reason, Thomas Sullivan. And I don't think the reason was just to save Sophia. I think it was to save you too. Thomas looked at the key. At Grace, who was still holding his hand. At Sophia, alive because he'd chosen right. At Margaret, offering him a second chance he didn't deserve. He thought about Emma. About being able to call her, to tell her Daddy wasn't working far away anymore. Daddy was working right here, earning his way back to being someone she could be proud of. Okay, Thomas whispered. Okay, thank you. Grace's hand tightened on his. When he met her eyes, he saw something there that made his breath catch. Not pity, not charity, hope. But before anyone could say more, an officer approached. Miss Riley, we need you to come down to the station, give a full statement. We want to make sure we have everything we need to keep Kane locked up for a long time. 3 days later, Thomas woke up in a real bed for the first time in 8 months. Margaret's garage apartment was small, just one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But it had walls that didn't leak, a heater that worked, and a window that looked out onto a garden instead of an alley. Thomas lay there, staring at the ceiling, still half convinced he'd wake up on the loading dock and discover it had all been a dream. His phone buzzed. Grace's phone, technically. She'd insisted he keep it. He'd finally gotten his own number activated yesterday. "Grace, coffee?" "I'm at Margaret's." "Brought breakfast." Thomas smiled despite himself. Grace had been by every day since the theater, bringing food, helping him settle in, teaching him how to use the washing machine. Small kindnesses that felt enormous. He dressed in the clothes Margaret had bought him. Real clothes from a store, not a donation bin, and walked across the yard to the main house. Grace sat at Margaret's kitchen table, 3 coffee cups in front of her. She looked up when he entered, and Thomas felt that same catch in his chest he'd felt every time he'd seen her for the past 3 days. "Morning," she said, and her smile was warm. "Real. Morning." Thomas took the offered cup, savored the first sip. "Where's Margaret?" "Doctor's appointment." Sophia took her. Grace's expression shifted, something troubled moving behind her eyes. "Thomas, I need to talk to you about something." The seriousness in her tone made him sit down. "What's wrong?" Grace pulled out her laptop, turned it to face him. On the screen was a news article. Local hero saves kidnapping victim. There was a photo, Thomas, taken by someone's phone camera that night, standing with police officers. "You're famous," Grace said. "The story went viral. Good Morning America wants to interview you." Thomas stared at his own face. He looked different in the photo. Stronger. Like someone who mattered. "I don't want to be famous," he said quietly. I know. But there's more." Grace clicked to another article, this one from a business journal. "Your old firm saw the story. Westcott and Associates." Thomas's stomach dropped. "What about them?" "They reached out. Said they made a mistake letting you go. Said they want to talk about bringing you back." Grace watched his face carefully. "Thomas, this could be your chance. Your real chance to get your life back." He should have felt elated. Vindicated. This was what he'd dreamed about during those long nights on the streets. Being seen again, being valued, getting back what he'd lost. But all he felt was uneasy. "Why now?" Thomas asked. "Why after 3 years?" "Because you're news. Because you're a feel-good story." Grace's voice was gentle but honest. "Because now you make them look good." Thomas set down his coffee cup. "That's what I thought." Grace reached across the table, took his hand. "You don't owe them anything. You don't have to go back to who you were before." "Who am I now?" "Someone better." Her thumb traced circles on his palm, and Thomas felt warmth spread through his chest. Someone who chose right when it cost everything. Someone who... Grace's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, frowned. "It's Detective Morrison. The one from that night." She answered, put it on speaker. "Hello. Miss Chin, is Thomas Sullivan with you?" The detective's voice was tense. "Yes, he's right here." "Good. Don't let him out of your sight. We have a problem." Morrison paused. "Derek Kane made bail this morning." Thomas felt ice water in his veins. "How?" "You had him on kidnapping, extortion. His lawyer found a technicality. And someone posted his bail. $500,000 cash." Morrison's voice hardened. "We're trying to figure out who, but Thomas," Derek made threats. "Said he knew where you were living. Said you were going to pay for ruining his life." Grace's hand tightened on Thomas's. "What do we do?" "Stay together. Stay in public places. We've got a patrol car heading to Margaret's house now." "And Thomas? That second vehicle from the theater?" "We identified it. It's registered to Derek's brother. Connor Kane." Thomas's blood ran cold. "He has a brother? Twin brother. And Connor's got a record, assault, extortion, armed robbery. Did 8 years in Stateville. Got out 6 months ago." Morrison's voice dropped. "Thomas, if Connor was there that night, if he helped Derek plan this." "Then they both want revenge," Thomas finished. "Exactly. I need you both to come down to the station. We'll put you in protective custody until..." A crash from outside. Glass breaking. Grace's scream died in her throat. Thomas moved to the window, looked out. Margaret's car was in the driveway, driver's side window shattered. And standing next to it, holding a tire iron, was a man who looked exactly like Derek. Connor Kane. And he was smiling. He's here, Thomas said into the phone. Connor's here right now. Get out. Get out of the house. Morrison was shouting. Units are 3 minutes away. Connor saw Thomas in the window. Pointed at him with the tire iron. Mouthed 2 words, "You're dead." Then Margaret's front door exploded inward. Grace screamed. Thomas grabbed her hand, pulled her toward the back of the house. Behind them, heavy footsteps. Connor's voice sing-song and wrong. "Thomas Sullivan. Come out, wherever you are." They made it to the kitchen. Thomas frantically looked for exits. The back door, but Connor would see them. The basement, but they'd be trapped. The pantry, Grace whispered. There's a crawl space. It leads to the garage. They ducked inside just as Connor entered the kitchen. Through the crack in the door, Thomas watched him overturn Margaret's table, smash her dishes. Looking for them. Hunting. "I know you're here," Connor called. "Derek told me everything. About the money. About the little hero who ruined everything." He laughed, and it was worse than Derek's anger. It was playful. "You know what's funny? That money, it wasn't Derek's plan. It was mine. Derek's just the face. I'm the brains." Thomas's mind raced. If Connor was the mastermind, then Derek had just been. "Derek's the idiot who got caught," Connor continued, as if reading Thomas's thoughts. "But me? I'm smarter. I don't leave witnesses. And I don't leave loose ends." Grace's hand was shaking in Thomas's. He squeezed it, trying to communicate what he couldn't say out loud. "I won't let him hurt you." Connor moved closer to the pantry. "You know what else is funny? Margaret's not at a doctor's appointment. We took her. Sophia too. They're with my friend Carlos right now. Very nice guy. Very good with knives." Thomas's heart stopped. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. But Grace's face had gone white. She'd dropped Margaret off herself that morning. Had watched them drive away. Connor's phone rang. He answered it, still standing right outside the pantry door. "Yeah, good. Send me the photo." A pause. Then Connor laughed. "Well, Thomas Sullivan, looks like I'm telling the truth after all." He held up his phone to the pantry door, knowing somehow that they could see. Recognize them? On the screen, Margaret and Sophia, bound and gagged, in what looked like a warehouse. A man stood behind them, face obscured, holding a knife. "Here's how this works," Connor said. "You come out nice and peaceful, and maybe I let them live. You run, you hide, you call the cops." He made a slicing gesture across his throat. "They die screaming. You've got 10 seconds to decide. 10, 9, 8. Thomas looked at Grace. Her eyes were huge, terrified, begging him not to do it. But he'd already lost everything once. He'd already been nothing. And the one thing he'd learned on those streets, the one truth that had kept him breathing. Some things were worth dying for. "I'm coming out," Thomas called. "Don't hurt them. Please." Smart man. Connor's smile was audible. "See, that wasn't so hard." Thomas squeezed Grace's hand one last time, trying to memorize the feeling of being touched with kindness. Then he pushed open the pantry door and stepped into Margaret's kitchen. Connor Kane stood there, tire iron raised, phone in the other hand. And his smile was the smile of a man who'd already won. "Hello, hero," Connor said. "Let's talk about what happens to people who ruin my plans." Behind him, through the shattered window, Thomas saw the flash of police lights. Still blocks away. Too far. He was on his own. Again. Connor moved fast. Before Thomas could react, the tire iron swung toward his head. Thomas ducked, felt the rush of air as metal passed inches from his skull. He dove forward, trying to tackle Connor, but Connor was ready. Knee to Thomas's ribs, same spot Derek had hit 3 nights ago. Pain exploded white-hot. Thomas went down hard. "Not so heroic now, are you?" Connor grabbed Thomas by the hair, slammed his face into the kitchen floor. Once. Twice. Blood filled Thomas's mouth. "You cost me everything. You know how much planning went into that kidnapping? How many months I spent setting it up?" Thomas tried to push up, but Connor's boot pressed into his spine. "Derek was perfect," Connor continued, almost conversational. "Angry, obsessed, stupid. I just had to point him at Sophia, suggest the ransom idea, and he ran with it. I would have gotten the money clean. Untraceable. Nobody would have known I was involved. Except Derek." Thomas managed through blood. "Derek's an idiot. He would have taken the fall, gone to prison, kept his mouth shut like a good little brother." Connor pressed harder. "But then you had to play hero. You and that church volunteer and that meddling old woman." From the pantry, Grace's voice. "The police are almost here." Connor laughed. No, they're not. You think I didn't plan for that? He pulled out a device from his pocket, pressed a button. Somewhere in the distance, an explosion. Small but unmistakable. Traffic accident on 5th Street. Gas main explosion on Riverside. Funny how these things happen. Police are going to be tied up for at least 20 minutes. Thomas's heart sank. Connor hadn't just planned this, he'd orchestrated everything. The bail money, the timing, the diversions. This was a man who thought 10 steps ahead. Here's what's going to happen, Connor said. You're coming with me. We're going to visit Margaret and Sophia, and you're going to watch what happens when people interfere in my business. Then, he leaned close, breath hot on Thomas's ear. Then I'm going to make sure you disappear so completely, even the homeless won't remember your name. Leave him alone. Grace burst from the pantry, holding a kitchen knife. Connor barely glanced at her. Sit down, sweetheart, or I'll kill him right now. Grace, don't, Thomas started. Connor's boot crushed down on Thomas's spine, cutting off his words with a scream. Grace froze, knife trembling in her hand. Thomas could see her calculating, trying to figure out if she could reach Connor before he killed Thomas. The answer was no. They both knew it. Put the knife down, Connor said, almost bored. You're not a killer. I can see it in your eyes. You're soft. Kind. Probably volunteer at animal shelters too, right? Grace's hand lowered slightly. That's right. Nice and easy. Because if you don't, Connor pulled out a phone, showed Grace the screen. Margaret and Sophia still bound. The man with the knife was closer now, blade touching Margaret's throat. One text from me, and Carlos opens them up like Christmas presents. The knife clattered to the floor. Good girl. Connor reached down, grabbed Thomas by the collar, hauled him upright. Let's go. Take me, Grace said desperately. Let him go. I'll do whatever you want. Just let him. I don't want you. Connor's voice was flat. You're nothing. You're just a witness I'll deal with later. But him. He shook Thomas like a rag doll. Him, I want to take my time with. He dragged Thomas toward the door. Thomas tried to fight, but his ribs screamed and his vision swam and Connor was stronger, faster, meaner. Grace grabbed Connor's arm. Please. Please don't. Connor's elbow caught her in the face. Grace went down hard, blood streaming from her nose. Grace! Thomas lunged toward her, but Connor yanked him back. She's fine. But she won't be if you don't walk right now. Thomas looked back at Grace, sprawled on Margaret's kitchen floor, blood on her face. Their eyes met. He saw terror there. And love. The kind of love that had been growing quietly between them for 3 days, unspoken but real. I'm sorry, Thomas whispered. Then Connor shoved him out the door, into the cold November morning, into a van waiting at the curb. The warehouse was exactly what Thomas expected. Abandoned, industrial, the kind of place where screams wouldn't carry. Connor's friend Carlos was there, heavily tattooed, dead-eyed, the kind of man who'd watched too much violence to be bothered by it anymore. Margaret and Sophia were tied to chairs in the center of the empty space. Margaret's oxygen tank sat just out of reach, and her breathing was labored, desperate. Sophia's face was bruised, tears streaming. Thomas, Margaret gasped when she saw him. No, you shouldn't have come. You should have run. Quiet, Grandma. Carlos pressed the knife to her throat again. Connor pushed Thomas to his knees in front of them. Look at this. The hero and the victims all together. It's almost poetic. Thomas's mind raced. The police would come eventually. Grace would call them, tell them what happened. But eventually might be too late. Margaret's breathing was getting worse. Sophia looked like she was going into shock. And Thomas had nothing. No weapon. No plan. No advantage except the one thing he'd always had, the ability to think. You won't get away with this, Thomas said. Too many people know. The detective, Grace, the news. The news, Connor interrupted, laughing. That's the beauty of it. You're famous now, Thomas Sullivan. The homeless hero. Which means when you disappear. When you relapse, go back to the streets, maybe overdose on something tragic. He shrugged. It'll be sad. A cautionary tale. But believable. That's what happens to people like you. You fall, you get up, you fall again. It's a cycle. The words cut deep because they were true. Thomas had been on that cycle. Had believed he'd never escape it. But first, Connor continued, we're going to make a little video. You're going to apologize for interfering. Beg me to spare these women. Really sell it. Then I'm going to kill them anyway while you watch. And then you'll kill me. Eventually. But like I said, I'm going to take my time. Carlos handed Connor the knife. Connor tested the edge against his thumb, smiled when blood welled up. Any last words, hero? Thomas looked at Margaret. At Sophia. At two people who'd shown him kindness when the world had forgotten him. Who'd given him a home, a purpose, a reason to believe he was more than nothing. He thought about Grace, bleeding on that kitchen floor, watching him be dragged away. He thought about Emma, his daughter, who still thought Daddy was working far away. And he thought about the man he'd been, the accountant, the husband, the father, before the world broke him. Before he broke himself. Yeah, Thomas said quietly. I've got last words. Connor raised an eyebrow. This should be good. You're right. I fell. I gave up. I stopped fighting. Thomas's voice grew stronger. But you made one mistake tonight. What's that? You reminded me why I stopped giving up. Thomas looked Connor dead in the eyes. Because people like you exist. People who hurt the helpless, who take what isn't theirs, who think kindness is weakness. And someone has to stand against that. Even if it costs everything. Especially if it costs everything. Connor's smile faded. Inspiring. Carlos, start recording. I want. The warehouse door exploded inward. Not police. Not tactical units. Grace. She stood in the doorway, holding Connor's tire iron, face bloody and fierce and absolutely terrifying in her determination. Get away from him, she said. Connor stared. How did you? You took his phone. Left mine. Grace held up her phone, screen showing a tracking app. I tracked the van. I followed you. And I called everyone, police, news, Margaret's neighbors. They're all coming. Right now. As if on cue, sirens. Real ones this time, getting closer. Connor's face twisted with rage. Carlos. Kill them. Kill all of them. Carlos moved toward Margaret with the knife. Thomas exploded upward. His shoulder caught Carlos in the stomach, drove him backward. The knife clattered away. They went down in a tangle of limbs. Connor lunged at Grace. She swung the tire iron, connected with his knee. He screamed, went down. Thomas. Grace threw him the tire iron. Thomas caught it, spun, brought it down on Carlos's hand as he reached for the knife. Bones crunched. Carlos howled. Connor was back on his feet, limping but furious, pulling a gun from his jacket. Time slowed. Thomas saw the gun rising. Saw it pointing at Grace. Saw Connor's finger tightening on the trigger. And Thomas moved. He threw himself in front of Grace as the gun fired. The bullet hit him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Pain white-hot and absolute. But Grace was behind him. Safe. Alive. The warehouse doors burst open again. Real police this time, dozens of them, weapons drawn. Drop the weapon. Drop it now. Connor looked at the police, at Thomas bleeding on the floor, at his brother's plan falling apart. He raised the gun toward his own head. Don't. The detective's voice. Morrison. Don't do it, Kane. But Connor was already pulling the trigger. The shot echoed through the warehouse. And then silence. Thomas lay on the concrete, blood pooling beneath him, vision darkening at the edges. Grace's face appeared above him, her hands on his face, his chest, trying to stop the bleeding. Stay with me, she was saying, voice breaking. Thomas, please stay with me. Help is coming. Just stay. Did I? Thomas's voice was barely a whisper. Did I do enough? You did everything. Grace's tears fell on his face. You saved us. You saved everyone. Thomas smiled. It hurt, but he smiled. Then the darkness took him. Thomas woke to the smell of antiseptic and the steady beep of monitors. Hospital. He was in a hospital. His shoulder throbbed with a deep, persistent ache. When he tried to move, pain lanced through him, sharp enough to make him gasp. Easy. Grace's voice, soft and close. Don't try to move yet. Thomas turned his head. Grace sat in a chair beside his bed, looking exhausted. Her nose was bandaged, bruises blooming purple under her eyes. But she was smiling. You're alive, she said, and her voice broke on the words. So are you. Thomas's throat was raw. Margaret? Sophia? Safe. Both of them. Margaret's down the hall. Her oxygen levels dropped, but she's stable. Sophia's with her. Grace reached out, took his hand carefully, avoiding the four. You saved them, Thomas. You saved all of us. The memories came flooding back. Connor. The warehouse. The gun. The shot. Connor. Dead. Grace's expression was complicated. He shot himself before the police could stop him. Derek's back in custody, no bail this time. Carlos is in the ICU under police guard. It's over. Really over this time. Thomas closed his eyes, let relief wash over him. It was done. No more threats. No more running. How long was I out? 2 days. The bullet missed anything vital, but you lost a lot of blood. The doctors said, Grace's voice caught. They said if I hadn't gotten pressure on the wound when I did, if the ambulance had been even 5 minutes later. But they weren't. Thomas squeezed her hand. You saved me. You took a bullet for me. Grace's eyes were wet. You didn't even hesitate. She couldn't finish. She just leaned forward, pressed her forehead gently against his good shoulder, and let herself cry. Thomas lifted his free hand, touched her hair with his fingers. It was soft. Real. This was real. I couldn't let him hurt you, Thomas said quietly. I couldn't lose. He stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. Not sure what they were to each other yet, what they could be. Grace lifted her head, looked at him with those impossibly kind eyes. You couldn't lose what? My reason, Thomas said. For being better. For trying. For believing I could be more than. He gestured vaguely at himself, at the man he'd been. Thomas Sullivan. Grace said his name like it meant something. Like he meant something. You were always more. You just forgot for a while. Before Thomas could respond, the door opened. Detective Morrison entered, followed by a woman in a dark suit carrying a briefcase. Mr. Sullivan. Morrison nodded respectfully. Good to see you awake. This is Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Connolly. She has some questions about the incident. Over the next hour, Thomas gave his statement. Every detail he could remember. Connor's confession about planning the kidnapping, the diversions he'd created, the threats, the video he'd planned to make. All of it recorded, official, ironclad. When they were done, Connolly closed her briefcase and stood. Mr. Sullivan, thanks to your testimony and the evidence we collected, we have enough to charge Derek Kane with conspiracy to commit murder in addition to the kidnapping charges. He's looking at life without parole. Good, Thomas said simply. There's something else. Morrison pulled out a folded newspaper, handed it to Thomas. You might want to see this. The headline read, Homeless Hero Takes Bullet to Save Volunteers. Below it, a photo of Thomas being loaded into an ambulance, Grace's hand reaching for him even as paramedics tried to pull her away. The article told the whole story, the money in the bread, the first rescue, Connor's revenge, the final confrontation. But it also told Thomas's story. How he'd lost his job, his family, his home. How he'd lived on the streets for 8 months. How he'd chosen honor over survival when it mattered most. At the bottom, a quote from Margaret Riley. Thomas Sullivan is a hero in every sense of the word. He had nothing, and he gave everything. That's the measure of a man's character. Thomas's vision blurred. He'd spent 8 months being invisible, being nothing. And now, there's more, Morrison said, almost apologetically. Your story's gone national. The interview requests are piling up. Good Morning America, CNN local news. Everyone wants to talk to you. Thomas looked at Grace. She gave him a small, supportive smile. I don't want to be famous, Thomas said. I just want to. What did he want? I just want to live a life I'm proud of. Then that's what you tell them, Grace said. If you decide to talk at all. It's your story, Thomas. Your choice. Morrison nodded. Well, when you're ready, my number's on that card. The media's camped outside, but we've got security keeping them away from your room. He headed for the door, then paused. Thomas? Thank you. For being the kind of man who does the right thing. We need more of those. When they were alone again, Thomas looked at the newspaper, at his own face staring back at him. He looked different. Older. Harder. But also stronger, maybe. Like someone who'd been tested and survived. There's something I need to do, Thomas said. Can you help me? Anything. I need to call my daughter. Grace left the room to give him privacy. Thomas stared at the phone in his hand, his new phone, courtesy of Margaret who'd insisted on paying for it, and pulled up the one number he'd memorized but hadn't had the courage to call in 8 months. His ex-wife answered on the second ring. Hello, Sarah. It's Thomas. Silence. Long enough that Thomas thought she might have hung up. Thomas. Her voice was careful, controlled. Where are you calling from? Mercy General Hospital. I'm okay. But I need to talk to Emma. Is she? You're in the hospital? Sarah's composure cracked. What happened? Are you? I'm fine. Really. Sarah, I need to talk to her. Please. Another pause. Then, she thinks you're in Atlanta. Working. I told her you were coming back for Christmas. I didn't know what else to. I know. And I'm grateful. But I need to tell her the truth. Some of it, anyway. Thomas took a breath. She's going to see me on the news. I'd rather she hear it from me first. The news? Sarah's voice rose. Thomas, what did you? Mom. A small voice in the background. Emma. Is that Daddy? Thomas's heart clenched. Sarah, please. He heard muffled conversation. Then breathing on the line. His daughter's breathing. Daddy. Thomas closed his eyes. Hey, baby girl. It's me. Are you in Atlanta? Are you coming home soon? Her voice was so hopeful, so trusting. 10 years old and still believing her father was the hero she remembered. I'm not in Atlanta, Emma. I haven't been. The words hurt, but they were necessary. I've been having a hard time. Some things happened, and I lost my way for a while. Silence. Then, are you sick? No, baby. Not sick. Just, how did you explain homelessness to a 10-year-old? How did you explain giving up? I was very sad. And very lost. But I'm finding my way back. That's why I'm calling. Because I want to be someone you can be proud of again. I'm always proud of you. Emma's voice was small but fierce. You're my daddy. Thomas's throat closed. He couldn't speak for a moment, could only hold the phone and try not to fall apart. Daddy, are you crying? Happy tears, Thomas managed. Because I have the best daughter in the world. When can I see you? Thomas looked at his bandaged shoulder, thought about Margaret's garage apartment, about the life he was slowly building. Soon. A few weeks, maybe. When I'm all better. But Emma, when you see me, I'm going to look different. Older, maybe. But I'm still me. Still your dad. Okay. Okay. A pause. Did something happen? Mom looks worried. I helped some people. Some friends who needed me. And I got hurt a little bit, but I'm going to be fine. You're a hero. Emma said it like a fact. Like of course her father was a hero. Thomas thought about the money in the bread. About choosing right when it cost everything. About taking a bullet for a woman he barely knew, but deeply cared for. I'm trying to be, he said. Every day I'm trying. They talked for another 10 minutes. About school, about Emma's new friend Olivia, about the upcoming Christmas play where Emma was playing an angel. Normal things. Beautiful, ordinary things. When they finally hung up, Thomas sat in the hospital bed and let himself feel it all. The pain, the relief, the hope, the love. He'd spent 8 months running from feeling anything. Now he was letting it all back in. Grace returned with 2 cups of coffee. She took one look at his face and knew. You talked to her. Yeah. How was it? Hard. Thomas accepted the coffee. And perfect. And Grace. Yeah. Thank you. For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing I was worth saving. Grace set down her coffee, took both his hands in hers. Thomas, you saved yourself. I just reminded you that you could. She leaned in slowly, giving him time to pull away. He didn't. Her lips touched his, gentle and careful and full of promise. When she pulled back, Thomas was smiling. What? Grace asked. I was just thinking, a week ago, I was eating stale bread behind a theater, convinced my life was over. And now you're a hero with a gunshot wound and a beautiful woman kissing you in a hospital room? Something like that. Grace laughed, and the sound was like sunlight. Well, for what it's worth. I think your life is just beginning. Thomas looked at her, really looked at her. At the woman who'd tracked him into danger, who'd fought beside him, who'd held his bleeding body and refused to let him die. Grace Chen, he said. Would you like to have dinner with me? When I get out of here. Are you asking me on a date, Thomas Sullivan? I am. A real one. With a reservation and everything. Then yes. Grace's smile was radiant. I'd love to. The monitor beeped steadily. Outside, the November sun was setting, painting the hospital room in shades of gold. And for the first time in 8 months, Thomas Sullivan felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The worst was over. Now came the part where he rebuilt his life. And he wasn't doing it alone. 3 weeks later, Thomas stood in front of the bathroom mirror in Margaret's garage apartment, adjusting his tie for the 5th time. The suit was secondhand but clean, purchased from a thrift store with money from his first paycheck. Margaret had insisted on hiring him officially as her property manager, a real job with real pay, helping not just with her house but coordinating maintenance for 3 other properties she owned. You look handsome, Grace said from the doorway. Thomas turned. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair down, the bruises on her face finally faded. She was beautiful. She'd always been beautiful, but now Thomas let himself really see it. I'm terrified, he admitted. I know. Grace crossed to him, straightened his tie even though it didn't need straightening. but you face down armed criminals. You can handle one interview. The interview. Good Morning America had been persistent, and Thomas had finally agreed to one condition. They'd film it here, in the neighborhood where everything happened. And Emma could be there. Sarah had agreed cautiously, after Thomas had spent 2 weeks proving through phone calls and video chats that he was stable, sober, committed to being present in his daughter's life again. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I? Thomas. Grace put her hands on his chest, looked up at him with those steady, kind eyes. Just tell your truth. That's all anyone wants to hear. A knock on the door. Margaret's voice. Thomas? The television people are here. And someone else too. Thomas's heart hammered. He took Grace's hand, squeezed it once for courage, and walked out. The main house yard had been transformed into a makeshift studio. Cameras, lights, a small crew bustling around. The interviewer, Rachel Morrison, no relation to the detective, stood talking with her producer. But Thomas only saw one person. Emma. She stood beside Sarah, wearing a yellow dress, her dark hair in braids. When she saw Thomas, her face lit up with a smile that could have powered the sun. Daddy! She ran to him. Thomas dropped to his knees, caught her in his good arm, held her like she might disappear if he let go. She was bigger than he remembered. Taller. But she still smelled like strawberry shampoo and still hugged him with her whole heart. I missed you so much, Thomas whispered into her hair. I missed you too. Emma pulled back, looked at his face seriously. You look different. Older. I am older. And hopefully wiser. Mom said you were a hero. That you saved people. Emma touched the sling on his arm gently. Does it hurt? Not anymore. Not with you here. Sarah approached slowly. She looked uncomfortable, out of place. Thomas stood, still holding Emma's hand. Sarah, thank you for bringing her. She wanted to come. Insisted, actually. Sarah's eyes searched his face. You do look different. Better. Healthier. I'm getting there. Thomas gestured to Grace, who stood a respectful distance away. This is Grace Chin. She's the reason I'm still alive. Grace came forward, offered her hand. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Sullivan. Ross, Sarah corrected gently. I went back to my maiden name. But call me Sarah. She shook Grace's hand, and something passed between them. An understanding, maybe. A recognition that they both cared about Thomas in different ways. Mr. Sullivan? Rachel Morrison approached with a warm smile. We're ready whenever you are. We thought we'd start with you and Emma, if that's okay? Just you two talking. Thomas looked down at his daughter. What do you think, Em? Want to be on TV with your dad? Emma nodded eagerly. They sat together on the porch steps, cameras surrounding them but feeling distant. Rachel sat across from them, microphone in hand. So, Emma, Rachel began gently, what's it like seeing your dad after all this time? Emma looked at Thomas, her hand still in his. It's really good. I was worried about him. Mom said he was having a hard time, but I didn't know what that meant. Now I do. And what does it mean? Rachel asked. It means sometimes grown-ups get lost too. Not just kids. And they need help finding their way back. Emma's voice was steady, wise beyond her years. But my daddy found his way. He helped people even when he was lost. That's what heroes do. Thomas felt his throat tighten. He looked at his daughter, this incredible, compassionate person, and wondered how he'd ever convinced himself he didn't deserve to be in her life. Rachel turned to Thomas. Emma calls you a hero. The media calls you a hero. But how do you see yourself? Thomas took a breath. This was it. The moment to tell his truth. I see myself as someone who made mistakes. Who gave up when things got hard. Who let depression and shame convince him he was worthless. He felt Emma squeeze his hand, encouraging him. I lost my job 3 years ago. My marriage ended. I got evicted. And instead of fighting, instead of asking for help, I just disappeared. Into homelessness. Into invisibility. The cameras caught every word. Thomas knew this would be everywhere, online, replayed, dissected. But it needed to be said. For 8 months, I lived on the streets. I ate from dumpsters. I slept behind a theater. I became the kind of person that most people look right through. Thomas's voice grew stronger. But then I found money in a piece of bread. $7,000 for $100. And with it, a note begging for help. He told the whole story then. Margaret and Sophia. Derek and Connor. The choices he'd made. The bullet he'd taken. Grace's unwavering belief in him. I could have kept that money, Thomas said. Could have used it to run, to start over somewhere nobody knew me. But I realized something that night. Running doesn't solve anything. Hiding doesn't heal you. The only way forward is to face what you've done, who you've become, and decide to be better. Rachel leaned forward. And are you better? I'm trying to be. Every single day. Thomas looked at Emma, then at Grace standing behind the cameras. I have people who believe in me now. People who remind me that one mistake, or 100 mistakes, don't define your whole life. You get to choose who you are every day. That's the gift of being human. What would you say to people watching who might be struggling like you were? Rachel asked. Thomas looked directly into the camera. I'd say you're not nothing. You're never nothing. Even when the world makes you feel invisible, even when you've lost everything, you still have the most important thing, the ability to choose. Choose to ask for help. Choose to do right even when it costs you. Choose to believe that tomorrow can be different than today. His voice broke slightly. And if you can't believe it for yourself yet, borrow someone else's belief. That's what I did. Grace believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Margaret gave me a chance when I had no right to expect one. My daughter. He looked at Emma, eyes bright with tears. My daughter loved me even when I didn't deserve it. Let people help you. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. The interview continued for another 20 minutes. Sarah joined them, talking about how difficult it was to watch someone you care about spiral, to balance protecting your child with hoping for reconciliation. Grace spoke about seeing past homelessness to the person underneath, about how Thomas's first action had been to return money he desperately needed because it was the right thing to do. Margaret and Sophia made appearances too, Margaret in her oxygen cannula, Sophia with her red hair newly cut short, both of them praising the man who'd saved their lives. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, Rachel shook Thomas's hand. That was powerful. Really powerful. This is going to help a lot of people. After the crew packed up and left, after Sarah had taken Emma home with promises of weekly visits, after Margaret and Sophia had gone inside to rest, Thomas and Grace sat alone on the porch steps. You did good today, Grace said, leaning her head on his shoulder. We did good. Thomas put his arm around her. I couldn't have done any of this without you. You could have. But I'm glad you didn't have to. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the neighborhood in shades of amber and gold. This street, this house, this life, it wasn't much compared to what Thomas had before. But it was real. It was his. And it was enough. Grace. I love you. The words came out easily, naturally. I don't know when it happened exactly. Maybe when you tracked me to that warehouse. Maybe when you first handed me that bread. But I love you. Grace lifted her head, looked at him with shining eyes. I love you too. I think I knew that night at the theater, when you were willing to die to protect people you'd just met. That's when I knew you were someone special. Thomas kissed her then, soft and slow and full of promise. When they broke apart, both were smiling. So what happens now? Grace asked. Thomas thought about it. About his daughter who loved him. About his job that gave him purpose. About this woman who saw the best in him. About the second chance he'd been given when he'd found money in a piece of stale bread. Now, Thomas said. Now we build something good. Together. Grace's smile was radiant. I like the sound of that. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. And Thomas Sullivan, former accountant, former homeless man, current hero, looked up at them and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not hope that tomorrow would be easy. Hope that tomorrow would be worth fighting for. And that made all the difference. 6 months later, Thomas woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment, he lay there, savoring the simple miracle of waking up warm, safe, and loved. Grace stirred beside him, her hair splayed across the pillow. They'd been living together for 2 months now, having moved into a small apartment closer to Emma's school. Margaret had blessed the decision, saying she'd always known they were meant for each other. Morning, Grace murmured, eyes still closed. Morning, beautiful. Thomas kissed her forehead. What time is it? 7. We have an hour before Emma gets here. Today was Saturday, their day with Emma. Sarah had been true to her word, allowing weekly visits that had gradually extended to weekend sleepovers. The apartment had a second bedroom now, painted yellow at Emma's request, with posters of her favorite bands and a shelf full of books. Thomas got up, pulled on jeans and a sweater. In the kitchen, he started breakfast, pancakes, Emma's favorite. Grace joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. Big day, she said. Big day, Thomas agreed. Tonight was the grand reopening of the Riverside Theater. After Thomas's story had gone viral, a group of investors had been inspired to renovate the abandoned building. They'd asked Thomas to speak at the opening, to tell his story one more time in the place where it had all begun. But first, breakfast with his daughter. Emma arrived right on time, Sarah dropping her off with a smile and a wave. The relationship between Thomas and Sarah would never be what it was, but they'd found something better: respect, co-parenting, and genuine care for each other's well-being. "Dad!" Emma burst through the door, backpack over her shoulder. "Guess what? I got an A on my history project. The one about ordinary heroes." "That's amazing." Thomas scooped her up in a hug. "What did you write about?" Emma's smile turned shy. "You. I wrote about you." Thomas's throat tightened. You didn't have to." "I wanted to." Emma pulled out a folder from her backpack, showed him the paper. There was a photo, the one from the news, of Thomas being loaded into the ambulance, and an essay titled "My Dad, an Ordinary Hero." Thomas read it standing in the kitchen, Grace looking over his shoulder, both of them misty-eyed by the end. Emma had written about courage, about second chances, about how heroes weren't always the people with capes and superpowers. Sometimes they were just people who chose to do right when it was hard. "This is beautiful, sweetheart," Thomas said, voice thick. "Mrs. Patterson wants to know if you'll come speak to our class," Emma said eagerly. "About homelessness and helping people and stuff." Thomas looked at Grace, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd be honored." They spent the morning together, pancakes, a walk in the park, Emma teaching them both a new card game she'd learned at school. Normal things. Beautiful, ordinary things that Thomas had once taken for granted and would never take for granted again. After lunch, Emma went to play in her room while Thomas and Grace prepared for the evening. "Nervous?" Grace asked, helping him with his tie, a new one purchased for the occasion. "Terrified," Thomas admitted. "What if I freeze up?" "What if?" "You won't." Grace kissed him softly. "You've told this story a dozen times now. But more importantly, you've lived it. That's what people connect with. Your truth." A knock at the door. Thomas opened it to find Detective Morrison, now a friend rather than just a professional contact. "Thought I'd give you a ride to the theater," Morrison said. "It's a zoo over there. Press, city officials, half the neighborhood. You're going to need an escort." They all piled into Morrison's car: Thomas, Grace, Emma, and the detective who'd helped save their lives. As they drove through the city, Thomas watched the streets go by, saw the alleys where he'd once slept, the corners where he'd once begged. "You okay?" Grace squeezed his hand. "Yeah." Thomas smiled. "Just remembering. And being grateful I don't have to go back." The Riverside Theater was transformed. The Art Deco facade had been restored to its original glory, lights blazing, a red carpet rolled out. A crowd had gathered, reporters, supporters, curious onlookers. Margaret and Sophia waited by the entrance, both dressed up. Margaret's oxygen tank was decorated with ribbons. Sophia's red hair caught the evening light. "There's our hero," Margaret called out, embracing Thomas carefully. "How are you feeling?" Thomas asked her. "Better every day. The doctor says my lungs are improving. I might not need this thing much longer." She patted the oxygen tank affectionately. "All the stress lifted, I suppose. Knowing Sophie's safe." Sophia hugged him next. "Thank you again. I know I say it every time I see you, but..." "You never have to thank me," Thomas said. "You're family now." Inside, the theater was breathtaking. The seats had been reupholstered, the stage rebuilt, the curtains replaced. It would be a community center now, offering theater programs for kids, space for local artists, and, most importantly, a daily meal service for the homeless. The irony wasn't lost on Thomas. The place where he'd eaten stolen bread was now going to feed hundreds. The program began. The mayor spoke, thanking donors and volunteers. The lead investor, a woman named Helena Vasquez who'd once been homeless herself, talked about the power of second chances. Then it was Thomas's turn. He walked onto the stage where he'd once faced down Connor Kane, where he'd chosen courage over survival. Emma sat in the front row beside Grace, both of them beaming. 6 months ago, Thomas began, I was sleeping behind this building. I was invisible. I was nothing. Or at least, that's what I'd convinced myself. He told the story again, but this time it felt different. Less raw. More like a lesson learned than a wound still healing. I think a lot about that dinner roll, Thomas said. About the money hidden inside. About Margaret's desperate prayer that someone honest would find it. And I wonder, what if I'd kept it? What if I'd run? My life might be easier right now. I might have made it to Atlanta, started over somewhere nobody knew me. He paused, looked at Grace, at Emma, at Margaret and Sophia. But I wouldn't have this. This community. This family. This purpose. Thomas's voice grew stronger. See, I thought the money was the miracle. But the real miracle was the choice it gave me. The chance to remember who I was before the world broke me. The opportunity to be someone my daughter could be proud of. Emma was crying now, happy tears. Grace had her arm around her. To everyone here tonight, whether you have a home or whether you're still looking for one, I want you to know this: you are not invisible. You are not nothing. Your life has value and meaning and purpose, even when you can't see it. Especially when you can't see it. Thomas gestured to the theater around them. This building was abandoned for years. Everyone thought it was worthless. But look at it now. Beautiful. Useful. Full of life again. That's what second chances can do. That's what happens when people refuse to give up on something, or someone that's lost. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. I'm not special, Thomas continued. I'm just a guy who found money in a piece of bread and made a choice. But that choice changed everything. Not just for me, but for Margaret, for Sophia, for Grace, for my daughter. One choice, one moment of choosing right over easy, and suddenly my whole life had meaning again. He looked directly at the people in the back rows, the ones who looked uncomfortable in their borrowed clothes, the ones who'd come for the free meal after the program. If you're struggling right now, if you're lost, if you think there's no way back, I'm here to tell you there is. It might not be easy. It probably won't be quick. But it's possible. Ask for help. Accept kindness. Choose right even when it costs you. And most importantly, never stop believing that you deserve better. Thomas's voice broke slightly. Because you do. We all do. And sometimes all it takes is one person believing in us, or one moment of believing in ourselves, to change everything. The applause was thunderous. Thomas saw people wiping their eyes, embracing each other, nodding in recognition of their own struggles. After the speeches, there was a reception. Thomas spent hours talking to people, former homeless individuals who'd turned their lives around, volunteers who wanted to help, teenagers who needed to hear that it was okay to struggle, okay to ask for help. One man approached Thomas near the end of the evening. He was in his 50s, wearing clothes that had seen better days, eyes hollow with the look of someone still in the fight. I'm living on the streets right now, the man said quietly. Have been for 2 years. Lost everything in a divorce. Lost myself after that. He swallowed hard. Your story, hearing you tonight, it's the first time in months I've thought maybe I could find my way back. Thomas put his hand on the man's shoulder. What's your name? Vincent. Vincent Hopper. Vincent, you can find your way back. I promise you that. It won't be easy, but it's possible. Thomas pulled out his wallet, handed Vincent a business card. His business card, with his name and phone number. This is me. Real me. If you need help, if you need someone to talk to, if you need a reference for a job, or just a reminder that you're not alone, you call me. Anytime. I mean that. Vincent stared at the card like it was a lifeline. Why would you do that? You don't know me. Because 6 months ago, a woman named Grace saw me when I was invisible. And that changed everything. Thomas smiled. Pass it forward, Vincent. That's all I ask. When you're back on your feet, you help someone else. That's how we fix this. One person at a time. Vincent nodded, clutching the card. Thank you. I won't let you down. You won't let yourself down. That's what matters. As the evening wound down, Thomas found Grace and Emma outside on the theater steps. The same steps where he'd once sat eating stale bread. Ready to go home? Grace asked. Home, Thomas repeated, testing the word. It felt good. Real. Yeah. Let's go home. Emma took one of his hands, Grace took the other, and they walked together under the streetlights. 3 people who'd found each other in the chaos and chosen to build something beautiful. 1 year later, Thomas stood at the front of a small church, hands shaking slightly as he adjusted his boutonniere. Morrison stood beside him as best man, grinning. You nervous? Morrison asked. Terrified, Thomas admitted. What if she changes her mind? She won't. That woman fought her way into a warehouse to save you. She's not backing out of a wedding. The music started. The small crowd stood, Margaret in the front row, oxygen-free now, beaming. Sophia beside her, engaged herself to a kind man who worked at the theater. Emma as the maid of honor, looking grown up in her lavender dress. Sarah in the third row, her new boyfriend beside her, genuinely happy for Thomas. And then Grace appeared at the back of the church. She was radiant in a simple white dress, carrying wildflowers, smiling like the sun had broken through clouds. She walked down the aisle alone, no one to give her away because she'd always belonged to herself, and when she reached Thomas, she took his hands. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," Thomas whispered back. The ceremony was simple, heartfelt. When it came time for vows, Thomas pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, the same note that had been wrapped around the money in the bread. Margaret had saved it, framed it, given it to him last week. "A year ago," Thomas said, "I found this note in a dinner roll. It asked me to do the impossible, to save someone I didn't know, to risk everything I had left, to choose right when choosing wrong would have been so much easier." His voice thickened with emotion. "I thought that note was about saving Sophia. But really, it was about saving myself." He looked at Grace, at her beautiful, tear-streaked face. "Grace Chin, you saved me in every way a person can be saved. You saw me when I was invisible. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. You loved me when I was unlovable. And you taught me that home isn't a place, it's people. It's choosing to show up for each other, every single day, no matter how hard things get." Thomas took her hands, held them tight. "I promise to show up for you. Every day. In good times and bad, in wealth and poverty. And I know about that poverty part, in sickness and health. I promise to choose you, to choose us, to choose love every single time." His voice broke. "You are my home, Grace. You always will be." Grace was crying openly now. "Thomas Sullivan, when I handed you that bread, I had no idea I was handing you, and myself, a future. You say I saved you, but you saved me too. You reminded me why I volunteer, why I care, why I believe people are good even when the world is hard." She wiped her eyes, smiling through tears. "I promise to be your home, just as you are mine. I promise to stand beside you through every challenge, every triumph, every ordinary Tuesday. I promise to love Emma as fiercely as you do, to honor the man you were, the man you are, and the man you're still becoming." Grace's voice steadied. "And I promise that no matter what life throws at us, we'll face it together. Always together." The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Thomas kissed Grace like she was the answer to every prayer he'd never known to pray. Emma rushed forward, hugged them both. "I have a mom and a dad and now a Grace mom. This is the best day ever." Grace laughed, scooped Emma up. "Grace mom. I like the sound of that." The reception was held at the Riverside Theater, now thriving as a community center. The meal was catered by a restaurant run by formerly homeless individuals. People Thomas had helped connect with resources, with hope, with second chances. Vincent Hopper was there, wearing a suit, working as a volunteer coordinator at the theater. He'd been sober for 8 months, had reconciled with his daughter, and spent his days helping others find their way back. "Congratulations, man," Vincent said, embracing Thomas. "Look at us. 2 guys who had nothing. Now we've got everything that matters." "We do," Thomas agreed. "We really do." As the evening wore on, Thomas found himself standing at the loading dock behind the theater, the spot where it had all begun. Grace joined him, still in her wedding dress, the November wind pulling at her veil. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About a dinner roll," Thomas said with a smile. "About $7,000 for $100. About the worst and best night of my life." Grace leaned against him. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think that money was never the miracle. You were. Your choice was. Your heart was." She looked up at him. Margaret didn't hide that money and hope just anyone would find it. She prayed for someone good. Someone honest. Someone who would do the right thing even when it cost everything. And the universe, or God, or whatever you want to call it, sent her you. Thomas thought about that. About all the coincidences that had to align. The bread, the spot, the timing, the choice. About how close he'd come to running, to keeping the money, to choosing wrong. "I almost didn't do it," he admitted. "I almost kept the money and ran. But you didn't. That's what matters. You chose right." Grace took his hand. "And that choice brought you here. To this moment. To me. To Emma. To a life worth living." "A life worth living," Thomas repeated softly. He pulled Grace close, looked out at the city that had once been his prison and was now his home. "Yeah, that's exactly what this is." From inside the theater, music played. Emma called out for them, wanting to dance. Margaret was probably sharing embarrassing stories. Morrison was likely eating all the good appetizers. Thomas and Grace stood there a moment longer. 2 people who'd found each other in the wreckage and built something beautiful. Then they turned hand in hand and walked back into the light, into the warmth, into their future. Behind them, the loading dock sat empty and quiet. But if you looked close enough, you could still see the faint marks on the concrete where a homeless man had once sat, stale bread in hand, facing the most important decision of his life. The marks would fade eventually. But what they represented, courage, kindness, the choice to be more than your circumstances, that would last forever. And somewhere in the city, another person was struggling. Another person was lost. Another person was one choice away from changing everything. Thomas Sullivan's story wasn't just about him. It was about all of us. About the moments when we're tested, when we're broken, when we're given a choice between easy and right. And about what happens when we choose right. Even when it costs everything. Especially when it costs everything. Because that's when we discover what we're really made of. That's when we find our way home. Hey friend, wherever you are in the world right now, thank you for taking this journey with Thomas. His story reminds us that we're never too lost, never too broken, never too far gone to find our way back. If his story touched you, if it made you think or feel or hope, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. There are so many more stories like this one waiting to be told. Stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stories about second chances and redemption and the power of choosing love over fear. Until next time, remember, you're not invisible. You're not nothing. And your story isn't over yet. The best is still to come.